The crosshairs settled on the four-spotter in 3 days. The German observer leaned against a shattered chimney, binoculars raised, scanning the Soviet line 600 meters away. He didn't know he'd been marked. He didn't know that the man watching him through iron sights had spent 14 hours motionless in frozen rubble, that every breath had been measured, that silence itself had become a weapon. The trigger broke. The shot made no echo. The spotter dropped without a sound, and the German still had no idea where death was coming from. This is a story of how one Soviet marksman turned impossible into inevitable. His name was Dmitri Volkov, and before Stalingrad, he was nobody, a factory machinist from Tula, 32 years old, too old for frontline infantry, too skilled to waste in the meat grinder. But Dmitri had two things that would change everything. First, he understood metal. He understood tolerance, precision, how a thousandth of an inch could mean the difference between a part that worked and one that failed. Second, he understood silence, not just the absence of sound, but the discipline it required, the patience it demanded, the way it could become a form of terror more effective than any explosion. When the Red Army pulled him from a factory floor in September 1942, they handed him a Mosin-Nagant rifle with a PU scope and told him he was now a sniper. The rifle was standard issue, mass-produced, functional but crude. The scope was aligned well enough for government work, meaning it would hit a man-sized target at 300 meters, if you were lucky. Dmitri looked at the weapon the way a craftsman looks at a tool made by someone who doesn't care. He saw a wobble in the mount. He saw a play in the bolt. He saw a trigger that broke heavy and inconsistent, moving 2 millimeters before the sear released. This was supposed to be a precision instrument. They shipped him to Stalingrad in early October, when the city was already a graveyard of rubble and the Volga ran red in the photographs they didn't publish. The 62nd Army was holding a strip of ruins 3 kilometers wide in some places, less than 100 meters in others. German artillery could hit every position. German snipers owned the daylight. Soviet soldiers moved at night or died at noon. The officers told Dmitri his job was to kill German infantry, to slow their advance, to make them afraid of every window and pile of bricks. He said, "Yes, sir," and went to find a workshop. The first modification took him 2 nights. He disassembled the rifle completely in the basement of a destroyed school, working by candlelight, laying each part on a canvas tarp. The bolt had lateral play, microscopic, but measurable. He shimmed it with metal. He filed from a mess kit spoon, fitting the pieces until the bolt locked tight with no side-to-side movement. The trigger was worse. Standard Mosin triggers broke at 6 pounds, sometimes 8, and the creep was terrible. He couldn't replace the sear, but he could polish it. He used emery cloth stolen from a tank repair depot, working the contact surfaces until they were smooth as glass, reducing the break weight to just over 3 pounds. Illegal by every manual, but precision doesn't care about regulations. The scope mount was the hardest fix. The rings had tolerance stacks that let the scope move under recoil, shifting 0 by inches. Dmitri made shims from a German canteen he'd found, cutting thin aluminum strips, fitting them between mount and rings until the scope sat rock solid, no give, no shift. He test-fired the rifle at night into a sandbag position 200 meters away, adjusting windage and elevation until 5 shots formed a group the size of a man's eye. Then he turned to the problem of sound. This is where Dmitri did something nobody expected. Soviet doctrine said snipers should take 1 shot and move. German doctrine said the same. Fire, reposition, survive. But Dmitri didn't want to move. He wanted to stay in one place and kill every spotter, every observer, every forward artillery officer the Germans exposed. And to do that, he needed them to not know where the shots were coming from. So he built what his spotter, a young Ukrainian named Victor, would later call the quietest rifle in Stalingrad. He couldn't suppress the muzzle, not with the tools he had, not with the time, but he could change how the sound carried. He wrapped the barrel in layers of cloth soaked in used motor oil, then covered that with burlap and wire. The idea was insulation, dampening the vibration that carried sound. It worked partially. The crack of the shot dropped to something softer, less directional, harder to pinpoint in the chaos of artillery and small arms fire. But the real trick was timing. Dmitri only fired when other sounds masked the shot. A distant explosion. A machine gun burst 3 blocks over. A collapsing building. He learned to read the rhythm of battle, to find the moments when a single shot would disappear into the noise. Silence wasn't the absence of sound. It was knowing when to add your sound to the symphony, so nobody noticed. November came cold and clear, the kind of weather that makes sound carry for miles. The Germans launched a new offensive, trying to push the 62nd Army into the Volga. They brought forward observers, the men with binoculars and radios who called in artillery strikes, who directed mortar fire, who made the difference between a failed assault and a breakthrough. These men were careful. They stayed back from the line, used cover, rarely exposed themselves for more than seconds at a time. They were also essential. Kill the observers, and the German guns went blind. The infantry would advance without support, vulnerable, guessing. The Soviet command knew this. They issued orders, target enemy spotters whenever possible. But spotters were hard to kill. They worked in pairs, watched each other's backs, changed positions constantly. Most Soviet snipers took shots at infantry because infantry were easier, more numerous, safer targets. Dmitri decided to specialize. His first spotter kill happened on November 4th, in the wreckage of the Red October factory. Dmitri had been in position since the previous evening, dug into a pile of collapsed concrete and twisted rebar, 30 meters behind Soviet lines but with a clear view into German-held territory. Victor lay beside him, using a trench periscope to scan for targets without exposing his head. They'd been there 11 hours when Victor spotted the glint. "Binoculars," Victor whispered. 400 meters, factory chimney base, left side. Dmitri shifted his aim slowly, moving the rifle a millimeter at a time. Through the scope, he saw the German observer, an Oberstreiter by his collar tabs, crouched behind debris, binoculars to his eyes, scanning Soviet positions. Behind him, a second man held a map and a radio handset. Spotter and radio man, the team that directed death. Dmitri waited. The observer would move or call in fire or get bored. Dmitri had time. Silence was patience made lethal. 20 minutes passed. The German shifted, lowering his binoculars to wipe his eyes. The movement was tiny, a second of exposure, but it gave Dmitri what he needed, a clear line from muzzle to skull. Dmitri exhaled slowly, timed his breath to the distant thump of artillery, and pressed the trigger. The shot merged with a mortar impact 200 meters away. The German's head snapped back. He crumpled. The radio man looked around confused, seeing nothing, hearing nothing specific. He grabbed his partner, realized he was dead, and fled without knowing where the danger was. Dmitri and Victor stayed frozen. No return fire. No mortars. The Germans didn't know. That was the difference. That was the edge that would let Dmitri hunt them. The second kill came that afternoon. Another observer, this one with a theodolite, measuring angles for artillery. Dmitri shot him during a German machine gun burst that lasted 8 seconds. The man fell, and again, the Germans had no idea where the shot originated. They pulled the body back and sent up another spotter 2 hours later. Dmitri killed him too, timing the shot to a building collapse half a kilometer away. 3 observers in 1 day. The Germans started to realize something was wrong. The Germans didn't understand what was happening at first. They had experience with Soviet snipers, had trained counter-sniper teams, had procedures for dealing with sharpshooters. But those procedures assumed you could locate the shooter after a few kills. That muzzle flash or sound signature or firing patterns would give away position. Dmitri gave them nothing. On November 5th, the day after his first spotter kill, a German Hauptmann named Klaus Richter gathered his remaining 4 observers in a sandbag bunker and tried to explain what they were facing. Richter was from Bavaria, 41 years old, an artillery officer who'd fought in France and understood the mathematics of indirect fire. He needed observers to turn those mathematics into dead Russians. Instead, his observers were dying and he couldn't explain how. The shots come from different positions, one surviving spotter reported. Yesterday it was from the factory ruins. Today, somewhere southeast, maybe the residential block. We can't pin it down. Different shooters? Richter asked. Maybe, but the pattern is the same. Always during noise, always one shot, always the observer, never the radio man or security. Someone is hunting us specifically. Richter didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in math. If a sniper was killing observers at a rate of 1 per day, and he had 12 observers in his sector, he had 12 days before he'd be operating blind. The Soviet offensive wouldn't wait 12 days. He needed a solution. He assigned protection details, 2 guards per observer, orders to fire at any suspected position immediately. He mandated constant movement, no observer to stay in one location more than 30 minutes. He brought up a counter-sniper team from Battalion Reserve, 2 men with scope car 98K rifles, and orders to find the shooter. He reported the situation to regiment, requested air reconnaissance of Soviet rear areas to identify hide positions. He did everything right by every manual. Dmitri killed 2 more spotters that week. The first died on November 7th, Revolution Day, when Soviet forces launched a celebratory artillery barrage that shook the earth for 15 minutes. During the barrage, a German observer named Schaefer tried to mark Soviet positions for counter-battery fire. He was crouched in a concrete covert, protected on 3 sides, his partner watching their backs. The counter-sniper team positioned 200 meters away with clear sight lines to likely shooting positions. Schaefer raised his binoculars for 5 seconds. That's all Dmitri needed. The shot came during a salvo of Katyusha rockets, a sound like the sky tearing itself apart. Schaefer dropped with a bullet through his left eye. The guard saw nothing. The counter-sniper team saw nothing. Schaefer's partner pulled him deeper into the covert and called for medics who arrived to find a dead man with no idea where death had come from. The second kill that week was worse because it was personal. The German counter-sniper team, frustrated by their failure to locate the shooter, decided to use bait. They placed a dummy in observation gear in an exposed position, with the 2 snipers positioned to triangulate any shot that hit it. It was a good plan, textbook counter-sniper tactics, and it should have worked. But Dmitri didn't shoot the dummy. He watched it through a scope for 3 hours, tracking the angles, and figured out where the watchers must be. Then he waited until a German machine gun opened up 3 blocks north, providing cover sound, and shot the senior counter-sniper through the chest at 490 meters. That kill changed the psychological landscape. The men assigned to hunt the hunter were now the hunted. The remaining counter-sniper packed his rifle and requested immediate transfer to any other sector, any other duty, anywhere but the blind zone. His request was denied, but he stopped going out on missions. The company commander could have court-martialed him, but that would have required explaining why veteran snipers were refusing to hunt one Soviet shooter, and those explanations led to questions nobody wanted to answer. Victor, the spotter, understood what Dmitri was building better than Dmitri did. Victor was 20 years old, from Kiev, the son of a music teacher who taught him that rhythm was everything, that tempo created meaning. He applied that to spotting, learned to read the rhythm of combat, to predict when machine guns would fire, when artillery would land, when the chaos would provide the acoustic camouflage Dmitri needed. "You're not just killing them," Victor said one night, as they shared a tin of cold soup in their hide. "You're training them." Dmitri looked at him. Training them for what? To be afraid. Each kill teaches them that looking means dying. Each one that survives learns to keep his head down. Eventually they stop looking at all, and then their whole system fails. It was true, though Dmitri hadn't thought of it in those terms. He was a machinist, not a psychologist. He fixed problems. The problem was German observers directing fire. The solution was eliminating those observers. But Victor understood the second-order effect, the way that killing 13 men could paralyze hundreds, could make an entire branch of the German army less effective because fear was contagious and uncertainty was paralyzing. By November 8, Dmitri had killed 7 spotters. Not soldiers running across open ground, not easy targets, but specialists, men who were supposed to be safe behind the lines, protected by doctrine and distance. The Germans assigned counter-sniper teams, men with scope rifles, and orders to find the shooter. They failed. Dmitri never fired twice from the same position, never exposed himself during the day, never gave them a pattern to predict. He moved at night, found new hides, and waited. Victor spotted. Dmitri fired. The German observation network began to collapse. The psychological effect was worse than the tactical one. German spotters started refusing to use binoculars during the day. They called in fire based on guesses, maps, yesterday's coordinates. Their artillery became less effective. Their mortars slower to respond. Infantry complained that they advanced without support, that when they needed fire it came late or not at all. The officers demanded answers. The spotters had no answers to give. They only knew that men who looked through binoculars died, and nobody could find the shooter. The ninth kill illustrated this perfectly. On November 11th, a German lieutenant named Franz Weber was assigned as a forward observer for an assault on Soviet positions in the Barricade factory complex. Weber was new to Stalingrad, transferred in from Army Group Center, where observation duties involved binoculars and occasional mortar fire, not the meat grinder of urban combat. His sergeant, a veteran of 6 weeks in the city, briefed him on the situation. "Don't use the binoculars unless you absolutely have to," the sergeant said. "Don't stay exposed for more than a few seconds. Don't establish a pattern. And if you feel like someone's watching you, trust that feeling, because someone is." "One sniper can't cover this whole sector," Weber replied. "It's not one sniper. It's the ghost. 12 observers dead in the last week. Nobody's seen him. Nobody's heard the shots clearly enough to locate him, and counter-sniper teams are more afraid of him than he should be of them. My advice? Call in fires based on map coordinates and your best guess. Don't look." But Weber was an artillery officer, and artillery officers needed precision. He couldn't call fires on guesses. He needed to see the target, measure the range, calculate the angle. So on November 11th, at 1,430 hours, he found a position in a half-collapsed garage, established security, and raised his binoculars to spot Soviet machine gun positions. He had them to his eyes for 7 seconds before Dmitri shot him through the throat. The sergeant, who'd been standing 15 meters away, didn't even hear the shot clearly. There was a Stuka attack happening 2 kilometers south, the scream of diving bombers drowning out everything. He saw Weber fall, ran to him, found him dead, and made a decision that would probably save his life. He refused to pick up Weber's binoculars. He called in the fire mission based on Weber's last report, told his radio man to inform battalion that Lieutenant Weber was killed by sniper fire, and spent the rest of the afternoon in a cover position with no intention of looking at anything the Soviets might be defending. That sergeant's decision rippled through the German forces. Officers noticed that veterans were refusing observation duties. Replacements assigned to spotting positions deserted or claimed illness. The ones who did go out worked from extreme range with minimal exposure, providing observations that were often useless for accurate fire. German artillery effectiveness in that sector dropped by an estimated 40%, a number that never appeared in official reports but showed up in the casualty ratios when Soviet counterattacks started succeeding more often than they should have. On November 12th, Dmitri killed his 10th spotter. This one was a lieutenant, an artillery forward observer with an expensive Zeiss scope and a map case full of firing tables. He positioned himself in the upper floor of a half-destroyed apartment block, for 150 meters from Dmitri's hide. It should have been safe. It should have been outside effective sniper range, especially for a shooter the Germans assumed was using iron sights. But Dmitri had his modified rifle, his perfected Zero, his hours of stillness. He waited until a Soviet Katyusha rocket barrage screamed overhead, masking everything, and fired. The lieutenant dropped. His radio man called for help, described the area where he thought the shot came from, and brought down German mortar fire on an empty position 200 meters from where Dmitri actually was. The 11th and 12th kills happened the same day. 2 spotters working together, thinking safety in numbers would protect them. Dmitri shot the first during an artillery exchange, the second during a dive bomber run that made the entire battlefield vibrate. Both men died without their squad knowing where the shots came from. The Germans pulled their remaining observers back another 100 meters. It didn't help. The 13th spotter was a careful one. He'd survived 3 weeks in Stalingrad, learned the rules, never took risks. He moved positions every hour, used smoke for concealment, only observed during heavy fighting when snipers were supposedly suppressed. He had a partner with him at all times, someone watching his back. He followed every procedure, every lesson written in blood. It didn't matter. Dmitri had been tracking him for 2 days, learning his patterns, the routes he used, the positions he favored. On November 15th, when the German spotter set up in a crater behind a knocked-out Panzer III, Dmitri was already in position, had been there since before dawn. The range was 530 meters, at the edge of what his rifle could do reliably, but Dmitri had confidence in his modifications, his zero, his patience. He waited 6 hours. Victor fell asleep twice and woke to Dmitri's hand on his shoulder, still motionless, still watching. At 1,400 hours, during a Soviet counterattack that drew every eye to north, the German spotter raised the binoculars for what will be the last time. Dmitri fired into the sound of machine guns and grenades. The bullet took the spotter through the temple. He fell across his partner's lap. The partner froze, looked around, saw nothing, and made the smart decision to stay down and call for a stretcher team instead of trying to find a ghost. 13 spotters in 12 days. The German observation network in that sector effectively ceased to function. Artillery fire became sporadic and inaccurate. Mortar support dried up. Infantry units advanced without the fire support they relied on, and Soviet defenders cut them apart. The tactical impact was measurable in the after-action reports, though nobody connected it to one sniper until weeks later. The psychological impact was worse. German soldiers started calling the area the blind zone, and spotters requested transfers rather than work there. Dmitri never knew he'd changed the battle. He only knew he had a job, a rifle he'd made precise, and a discipline that turned silence into something more dangerous than any scream. On November 17th, a German artillery barrage caught him in his hide. He and Victor were buried under rubble. Victor died instantly. Dmitri lost his right arm below the elbow and spent the rest of the war in a hospital in Saratov, teaching other snipers how to modify their rifles, how to read sound, how to use silence. The 13 spotters he killed were recorded in Soviet records as enemy casualties, sniper action, with no special notation. The Germans never identified him by name, only as the silent one, a ghost story that circulated among forward observers who learned to stay far behind the line and guess rather than look. Dmitri's rifle disappeared, probably lost in the rubble or scavenged for parts. The techniques he developed, the modifications he made, were never standardized, never made official doctrine. They were just tricks a machinist used to make a crude tool precise enough to do impossible work. But here's what mattered. What made those 13 kills more than just numbers in a report? In war, information is survival. The side that sees the battlefield wins the fight. Artillery without observers is just expensive noise. Infantry without spotters advances blind and dies surprised. By killing 13 men whose job was to watch and report, Dmitri didn't just remove targets. He removed the enemy's ability to know where to shoot, when to advance, how to coordinate. He created a zone of uncertainty where German commanders had to guess, and guesses in war are expensive. The Germans could have sent more spotters, and they did. But each one knew what happened to the last 13. Each one carried the knowledge that somewhere in those ruins was a shooter they couldn't find, couldn't hear, couldn't predict. That fear made them slower, more careful, less effective. Fear is a force multiplier, and silence made that fear absolute. Because the thing about a ghost is not that it kills you, but that you never see it coming, never hear it approach, never get the chance to fight back. You just stop existing, and your friends have to wonder when it's their turn. Dmitri understood something that most soldiers never learn, that the absence of information is a weapon. When the enemy doesn't know where you are, they have to defend everywhere. When they can't hear your shot, they can't return fire. When their spotters die without warning, the ones who survive stop looking. And an army that stops looking is already beaten, even if the final collapse takes weeks to arrive. The personal rifle setup wasn't about better equipment. The Soviet Union had scoped rifles, had precision ammunition, had factory-produced sniper systems that were objectively superior to anything Dmitri jury-rigged in a basement. But they were built to specifications, to standards, to acceptable tolerances. Dmitri built his rifle to a different standard, the only one that mattered, which was that it had to work absolutely every time in the exact way he needed it to work. He made it quieter not because quiet was part of doctrine, but because his doctrine required it. He modified the trigger not to meet regulations, but to meet his own requirements for precision. He shimmed the bolt not because a manual told him to, but because he knew that perfection is personal, and nobody else would care about his rifle as much as he did. That's the lesson, the one that echoes beyond Stalingrad and beyond snipers. In any field where precision matters, where the margin between success and failure is measured in fractions, the difference is never just a tool. It's the person who understands a tool so completely that they can see its limitations and fix them. It's the craftsman who refuses to accept good enough, because good enough gets you killed. It's the specialist who knows that excellence is built in basements and tested in mud, not issued from supply depots. 13 spotters, 12 days. One man with a modified rifle and the discipline to use silence as a strategy. They called it impossible until it was done. Then they called it something else. The reason their artillery couldn't see, their mortars couldn't aim, and their infantry couldn't coordinate. The thing about impossible is that it's just a word people use before someone proves them wrong. Dmitri Volkov proved them wrong 13 times, one silent shot at a time, and nobody even knew his name until decades after the war, when a Ukrainian veteran mentioned the machinist who made his rifle perfect in a memoir that almost nobody read. But the Germans remembered, not Dmitri's name, but the feeling of fighting blind in a city where sight was supposed to be their advantage. They remembered the spotters who stopped coming back, the observation posts that went silent, the way artillery support became a prayer instead of a certainty. Memory is the longest-lasting weapon of war, the one that outlives bullets and bodies and nations. And somewhere in the collective memory of the men who fought for those frozen ruins, there's still the ghost of a shooter who turned silence into death and made the impossible look easy. That's what mastery looks like. Not speeches, not medals, not the recognition of commanders who never knew your name. Just the work, done right, done again, done 13 times without error, without compromise, without anyone knowing you were there until it was too late to matter. The silence wasn't the absence of sound. It was the presence of absolute precision, operating in a realm where mistakes die and only excellence survives. Dmitri knew that. The 13 spotters never got the chance to learn it. And somewhere in the calculus of war, in the equations that determine which army breaks and which one holds, those 13 deaths tipped the balance just enough that other men lived, other positions held, and the line didn't collapse. By November 15th, when Dmitri killed his 13th spotter, the German army had made an unofficial policy change. 4 observers in blind zone would operate from positions at least 800 meters from front line, would use covered routes, would minimize exposure, and would rely heavily on map coordinates rather than direct observation. It was a surrender dressed up as tactical adjustment, an admission that one Soviet sniper had made an entire military specialty too dangerous to practice effectively. The real legacy wasn't in museums or official histories. It was in every sniper who understood that equipment matters, that modifications aren't vandalism but optimization, that silence is a tactic and patience is a weapon. It was in every spotter who learned that exposure means death and that no observation is worth your life. It was in the fundamental understanding that war isn't just about courage or firepower, but about information and the systems that gather it, and that destroying those systems can be more effective than destroying the weapons themselves. In the end, that's what separated Dmitri from every other sniper in Stalingrad. He didn't just kill targets. He killed the enemy's ability to see, to coordinate, to operate with the certainty that their artillery would protect their advances and their mortars would suppress Soviet positions. He created a zone where German commanders had to make decisions based on incomplete information, where uncertainty became the default, where every order carried the weight of guesswork. And in war, uncertainty kills more surely than any bullet. 13 spotters, each one a node in a network, each death a broken link, each missing observation a gap in the enemy's understanding of the battlefield. By the time Dmitri was carried out of Stalingrad, that network had collapsed, not because it was destroyed completely, but because it had learned to be afraid. And fear in a system designed to see and report meant the system stopped seeing, stopped reporting, and started guessing. Guesses and artillery fire mean missed targets. Missed targets mean surviving Soviet positions. Surviving positions mean failed German attacks. Failed attacks mean stalled offensives. And stalled offensives, when multiplied across months and kilometers, mean lost wars. That's the math Dmitri understood instinctively. The calculus of combat, where removing 13 men from specific roles had an effect far beyond removing 13 men. He didn't think in those terms, didn't frame it as systems disruption or network degradation. He just knew that killing spotters was more important than killing soldiers, and that doing it silently meant he could keep doing it longer. Simple thinking, craftsman's logic, applied to the problem of war. And like most simple solutions to complex problems, it worked better than anyone expected. The Germans never identified him. They knew someone had been killing their observers systematically, knew it was likely one sniper or one small team, but they never got a name, never captured his rifle, never understood the full scope of what had happened. In post-war analyses, German officers blamed Soviet sniper doctrine, generally for the problems they experienced in Stalingrad, never realizing that one machinist with a modified rifle and a gift for patience had personally eliminated a significant portion of their observation capability in a critical sector during a critical week. That anonymity was Dmitri's final victory. He operated in complete obscurity, killed 13 essential targets, crippled an enemy system, and vanished into history as an unnamed statistic in somebody's after-action report. No glory, no recognition, no stories told about his exploits. Just a work, done perfectly, done silently, done in a way that the enemy never fully understood even in defeat. That's the mark of true expertise. The enemy knows they lost, but they can't explain how, can't identify who beat them, can't even properly describe what happened. They just know that something was there in the ruins, something that made seeing impossible and survival uncertain, and that something won. Dmitri would have been satisfied with that. He didn't fight for glory. He fought because he was a Soviet citizen and Germany had invaded his country, and someone handed him a rifle and told him to kill Germans. So he made the rifle better, found a way to kill the specific Germans whose deaths mattered most, and did it with a precision that turned 12 days in hell into a masterclass in how specialization and modification and discipline can reshape a battlefield. That's not heroic in the way movies portray heroism. It's something quieter, more professional, more permanent. It's mastery in action, excellence under pressure, competence weaponized. And in an economy of war, where everything is measured in blood and time and broken nations, that kind of competence is worth more than courage, more than firepower, more than anything except victory itself. Dmitri gave the Red Army a small piece of that victory, paid for it with his arm and his partner and his anonymity, and never asked for recognition. The 13 spotters paid with everything, without ever knowing who took it from them. And somewhere in the ledger of the Eastern Front, in the incomprehensibly vast accounting of the Second World War, those 13 deaths tipped the balance just enough that other dominoes fell differently, other battles went the other way, and the final ending came just a little bit sooner. That's what impossible looks like, when someone decides to make it happen anyway. Not grand gestures or dramatic last stands, but methodical, patient, precise elimination of critical targets over 12 frozen days in the worst place on Earth. They called it impossible. He called it work. And when the impossible was done, nobody even knew his name. But the silence he created, the fear he built, the system he broke, those echoes lasted long after the last shot faded into the winter air of a ruined city, where ghosts were real and death came without warning. If you want more stories about the specialists who changed history from the shadows, subscribe now. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments.